Cool. So we're in the last session now. We are going to bring ourselves back to some of the business use cases within this session. I think it's clear from the discussion that we've had today, there's been lots of good debate. There are no set solutions as to how we think we're going to go about this. I think from my perspective, what is really interesting to see is the proof of concept that's being proposed. Because certainly what we need to see is users being tested and seeing what their attitudes to these type of solutions are going to be as well. We've debated a lot of the other areas today, so actually putting some users through and seeing how they react to this and the usability of it will be interesting. So I'm actually going to go over to the panel, ask them all to introduce themselves, just spend a couple of minutes just talking about their role, their organisation and their interest in this topic. Then we've got some questions and then I'm going to open to the floor for some debate.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Chris Ratcliffe. I'm Managing Director of Portland TV. We're an adult broadcaster. We operate Ofcom licensed broadcast services and ATVOD notified on-demand services in the UK only. I'm chair of the Adult Provider Network, a coalition of UK-based operators wrestling with age verification. I'm also industry lead on the Digital Policy Alliance Age Verification Group, which has just kicked off its BSI PAS. I think, we've been talking about age verification this afternoon as though it's something new to us, it's something we're just trying to get to grips with, but as Pete Johnson from ATVOD has pointed out, it's been mandatory for UK-based adult providers since 2010. So I think, we can talk this afternoon about what we have been doing to date, what is successful, and perhaps, how we move forward from there. But I'll pass on to Rob for the moment.
Rob Johnson, Chairman of Telecom 2 for the past 6 years. Prior to that, I was in the adult industry, principally working for David Sullivan, involved with the licensing of 120 sex shops under the private brand. The Video Recordings Act, we successfully took the British Board of Film Classification to court, to the High Court on and won, which changed the strength of material that was available on R18. And also from 2003 onwards in the mobile space, I've been involved with adult content on mobile through the Mobile Broadband Group. So I have a payment and verification current job, but I have an adult background.
That's quite a pedigree, Rob. How do I follow that? He's an adult. Okay, so I'm Catherine Devlin. I'm president of the Electronic Cigarette Industry Trade Association. I actually set up that association in 2010 when the industry was just beginning to really take a really get started. And obviously it hasn't really taken off until a bit later on. It was about 2012 that it really went whoosh. But from 2010 on, we've had a voluntary age restriction in the sector. And even outside of our membership, it has been very widely taken on board that, these are not products for children any more than tobacco cigarettes are. But now we have a mandated age restriction coming in on the 1st of October with no indication as to what will be deemed acceptable for that. So I'm very hopeful that this PAS, which is being developed with DPA, it's our members of DPA, I'm very hopeful that this PAS will actually give guidance as much to enforcement officers and regulators and government as it will to my sector as to what the levels of evidence should be to be able to demonstrate due diligence when it comes to age checking for online sales.
Hello, I'm Chris Field. I'm CMO of Yoti. Yoti is a new digital identity system. We're not yet live. We're due to launch in Q1 of next year. I hope that we might be able to kind of solve some of the kind of questions that have been brought up today with our solution. It's just one solution of many, but we're a user-centric ID system that puts the user back in control of their data so that they decide which attribute they wish to share and who with, because as ultimately the information will then flow both ways between the users. It's a smartphone application that's designed to allow users to show elements of their ID, either their passport or their driving license, to web services and indeed other individuals. It's simply you take a selfie, You scan your document, we then match the two biometrics, and we encrypt it, store it in secure servers, and give the user a key so they're able to share that attribute or whichever attributes they require. It's a kind of a once checked, use many times solution. Because we're based on biometrics, there's no username or password, which consequently means that we're able to tackle some of the challenges around abuse of credentials, because ultimately you need your biometrics to show who you are. So we're excited about working with some of the other IDPs here today and adult content providers to see if we can work together to create some kind of solution.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm John Marsden. I'm primarily responsible for the ID and fraud turnover of Equifax in the UK. Equifax, a lot of people will probably know of us or deal with us in some form or other. We operate a bureau in 19 countries. What does that mean? We collect a lot of data off a lot of individual companies, aggregate that into something usable. So in the terms of age verification, very critical for us for our core marketplace of credit granting. So we've been doing this for many years. And certainly in the last 15 years been providing verifications of date of birth for those largely over 18 widely across the industry. That's Equifax, so thank you, Emma.
Okay, cool. So I've got a question for Chris, first of all. You say that you've had age verification implemented since 2010. I just was wondering what types of methods you're using at the moment, how are they working for you, what are the challenges with what you're doing at the moment?
So we use the full range of AppVod approved methods. So first and foremost, that's payment by a credit card. So the user has to have that credit card in their possession. What we see, however, is that only 30 to 35% of all our customers are paying with credit card. So any company, a lot of companies in the adult space tend to go credit card only because they see other age verification means as cost prohibitive. But if you do that, you're immediately losing between 65 and 70% of the market. So we were very quick to introduce other verification means. We integrated and now verify against the edited electoral roll and against credit data. This obviously requires us to get an awful lot of personal sensitive data from customers. That requires their name, their address, and their date of birth. Now, some customers are willing to do that, and that together with credit card initially was my only means of verification. What I see from those verification means of electoral roll and credit data is a very high match rate. My match rates are running to about 70%. But I was keen to introduce additional methodologies and additional approaches. Most recently, we've integrated with Verimi, which is Rob's solution.
Thank you.
That allows us to verify against a mobile phone number and a mobile phone number only. So what we're relying on here is the mobile network operators and the pre-verified status of your phone. So what we do, we take that mobile phone number through Rob's system, it sends a text to that mobile phone. You then have to consent to a verification, and at that point, Verimi will look up the status of your handset, and on the basis of that being verified, we will then allow access. For returning customers, we've created an account, so it's a verify only at point of registration. Returning customers then enter through a password and username. We also allow customers to verify against passport and driving license. Passport not successful, but a lot of people like to put in their driving license details. What we do now, we present our customers with the full range, because previously we were sort of channeling them down the electoral and credit data route, and now I believe that we should give them the broadest option. By far the most popular at present is the mobile solution, I think because of the ease, because a customer, when they go to the electoral roll credit data set and they see that form, it is a hindrance. So I'm trying to, this notion of data minimization, I think, is the appropriate approach. I think we need the broadest range, and I don't, I said it earlier, I don't think we've seen the innovation in this space yet. I still think we're requiring far too much personal data of our customers. I think ultimately the verification should be happening off the merchant sites, and that's why I'm an advocate of a federated system whereby this happens away. I think then that presents IDPs with a possibility who are maybe concerned about brand protection to then distance themselves from merchants' product, which they may wish to not necessarily integrate with. I know there's been resistance from certain IDPs along the way. So I'd say we're in a good space. I appreciate that some of those methods that I've mentioned, perhaps lack the authentication that's been talked about in other sessions, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's kind of build on where we are at present, and look for greater innovation in this space.
So just to carry on that point, you touched on federation, which is something that I think we've talked about quite a lot today. That concept of verify once and use many times, and there are new players kind of moving into this space. The likes of Yoti with this kind of federated identity. We've got personal data stores, the likes of William Heath were in the room earlier on. What's your view in terms of the benefits of a federated approach over how you're doing things today, the status quo?
I think, well, in the adult space, I mean, we are quite fortunate. We've got a brand going back 20 years. We launched our broadcast services in '95, so we're very much an established UK brand. So I think there's a confidence in our brand, Television X, that there isn't in other adult brands in the market. So I think that's a challenge for adult companies, for a customer to engage and entrust their personal data with an adult provider. So I think what Federation does, it moves that issue away from the end merchant. Quite who and what that brand is that inspires that customer confidence, though, is a whole other issue. And I think that that's where we have to start. Is it an Equifax? Is it a Yoti? How does Yoti possibly begin to build from scratch confidence in a brand? I think these are some of the questions we now need to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that work on that PAS is going to be interesting to work some of those solutions out. So, Rob, you said you've got a number of clients using your solution within the adult space. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of work done, around. Rachel was talking about the GPGs earlier on. Work that's been done in the Assure UK. Obviously, work that's been learning from the gambling sector. What would you say that the lessons are to be learned from the work that you've done, for example, in the space, in the adult content space?
I'm going to duck that one. I was hoping that this gentleman here would be here who said that he liked numbers, because I also like numbers. So I'm going to give you some numbers first, all right? First of all, 100% of the commercial adult providers that I talk to do not want to serve content to children. They have no commercial or strategic interest in serving content to children, and that's the commercial ones. The second fact I have is that on a global basis, the UK market represents about 6 or 7% of the visitors to adult sites in terms of clicks, but it represents 12 to 13% in terms of revenue. So we are an important part of the market, but we're not a crucial part of the market. And I think that's important that we realise that if we're going to try and impose something, that we have to take that into consideration, and everything might just flow around us. The other figures I have is that, based on some figures I've seen, pretty much every adult in the UK visits the tube sites at one point or another, and those that tell you they don't represent extremely small numbers. Approximately 60% of them are on mobile or iOS systems, and 40% are on PCs. And on the payment transactions, as Chris said, 65 to 70% are now debit card. There's a huge rise. It's a big change over the past 4 or 5 years to come away from credit card to head towards debit card, which puts a challenge on this PAS and the way we construct it, because people from the age of 12 onwards can get debit cards. So moving on to your question now, I think I've got a vision of how this could work, and it was touched on the previous panel. and addresses a number of the issues here. Basically, we have to block. We have to block every adult IP. Today on here, I typed Pornhub on the wireless system here, and I got onto Pornhub on the British Library wireless system, whereas outside, having my coffee in Costa before, I couldn't get onto Pornhub. So they're able to block it. These guys are able to block it. So that's a conscious decision. So block everything, and then you need an AppVod on steroids, basically, which has a number of sites who register with it because I want to register, because I want to make my site available to adults. I think they should be able to get there, so I would give that list. So you'd blacklist, then you'd whitelist. You then have to then have forms of age verification, which obviously we're saying at that point that they go through. And I've got a bit of an example of how AppVod dealt with this, and I asked this guy if I could use his example. And it shows you the state. There really isn't, except for a few guys here who've hung on in there for a British adult business. It's completely gone. It's completely shot. This guy was a page 3 photographer, and he has a vast amount of content, but no real way of marketing it anymore. He used to do the photography for the calendars and the like. So he decided to embrace the new technology, and he created 5 websites. But he ran out of money. He registered with AppVod, and one of his sites was compliant and 4 weren't. AppVod then wrote to him and said, here's a Section 11 notice. You're not compliant. I give you 2 weeks to be compliant. He then came to us. We worked with him. And 2 weeks later, they wrote to him again and said, you're now compliant. So I think we have the model. It won't be perfect. It won't fit everything that is put before us, but we can start with something. And I think there is a real willingness to it. That way, MindGeek would be acceptable, and if Xhamster don't want to play game, they're not going to be available. They're going to be blocked. If we can adopt that, then I think the industry, those that adopt, need to be given something back. And 2 things spring to mind. We had the lady from Barclays here earlier. If you currently are an adult provider and you want a merchant ID to take credit card on your website, adult content is on a list which actually says, we will not give you a merchant ID. And it's all adult content, right? There's people here, and historically, some people have still got the merchant IDs from the past, but the credit card providers should give merchant IDs to those companies that are trying to comply. Similarly, and this was touched on, Google have not currently selling AdWords on adult, but if you are compliant, you should be allowed to go on Google and sell your product around AdWords. And that 2 things would incentivize the industry to comply.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I've got a question for Catherine. So you're working with the DPA on the PAS that's being scoped at the moment. In terms of, we've talked about levels of age assurance today and age checking. In your mind, what kind of level of age assurance is enough? And, what would you like to see really in the detail and the scope of that PAS to really make this become a reality for you as an organisation that needs to have this?
That's a really key question, because there's been a lot of discussion over the course of today. And I mean, I have to say thank you to Rachel and the rest of the organisers of this event. I hope it wasn't just you on your own, but it's been phenomenally useful and a really, really interesting range of discussions. But we have ranged quite far and wide over the course of today. And I think as far as the PAS is concerned, it's the very nature of the way the British Standards Institution functions when it's doing standards and PASs and documents of that ilk, that there is a very, very specific scope. And you have to be really, really careful that you don't end up with scope creep, so that you're sort of adding bits on. And the focus for the PAS is purely on being able to age verify at the point of sale for age-restricted products online. We're not looking into all of the other issues that have been discussed today, because we simply can't. If we allow the scope to sort of spiral out of control like that, we'll actually achieve nothing. So what we've sought to do within the DPA is to try and make sure that we can focus on one specific area that we, it's very clear from various of the guests in the room and here on the stage that there are industry sectors that have a serious issue with this. They have legal mandated obligations that they actually don't know how to meet necessarily at this stage. So there's a problem there, and the BSI PAS is hopefully going to work on finding solutions for that. And I'm particularly interested in what Chris just was talking about the federated approach, and indeed Rob's option, and the OT option, and all the other options, in the sense that if we can actually get a federated approach that, as you said, Chris, takes it away from the sort of merchant, where it's done somewhere else, but perhaps done by a variety of means somewhere else, so that there is a range of solutions being offered to consumers so that they have the widest possible choice, exactly what Chris was talking about, that he's already doing. So there's a huge choice for consumers, so they can choose how they want to verify their age. And then they get the token or whatever it may be, and then they're able to use it on Chris's sites, on my sector's sites, on gambling sites, on alcohol sites, whatever it may be. That seems to me to be the sweet spot that we need to be trying to aim for. But it's the beginning of the process right now, and we need to give it time. We need to have the input from all of these people with the various levels of expertise to try and craft that document and make sure that what we end up with is something that's actually functional to solve that particular problem, nothing else, just that particular problem.
So I think that's an interesting point. I mean, I'm going to ask one last question and then I'm going to open it to the floor. The way that the industry tends to work at the moment around data that's used for verification is that you have to keep on going back to the data each time and re-verify, which pushes up the cost of that verification. So I'm going to ask a question to John, a particularly sticky question. If we're seeing lots of moves towards federation, but that doesn't necessarily sit with the commercial model of traditional credit referencing agencies like Equifax. So what's your view in terms of federation and the way that those commercial models work, and how will they evolve to move with the way that the industry is going?
Thanks, Emma. I think it's an issue for us. We would charge on every verification traditionally, and we're talking about a reuse case here. So we verify age once. It's one of the static components where, the dynamic components of a credit file will change all the time. Date of birth, one would hope, never changes. Depends who you ask. So once you've authenticated someone's age, we just live with that in a federated system. That's the way we've approached it today, so we're not taking a different direction, but it does give us an issue of dissolving our ability to raise revenue going forward. After all, we're all together. A lot of people rely on this data. Our data is spread wide and deep within the industry. It's not just us providing our own data. There needs to be some deep thought about how we get into this reuse case to make sure that engine still runs and keeps it smooth for everyone involved. We haven't tackled that issue yet. We can see it coming down the line. So thank you.
And then just quickly to Chris from Yoti, so you have this kind of federated model. I guess you'll be talking to the likes of Equifax and others. How have you dealt with that kind of bit of a sticky commercial issue?
Well, for us, the costs are a little bit lower because ultimately we just verify once that the individual is a person, is who they say they are, against an identity document, and then we're able to effectively sell that information kind of multiple times. And so we're able to have a much more cost-effective model because we're not interrogating a database. We're basically allowing the user to share that one specific attribute themselves. So that's why it makes it more cost-effective for us.
Okay, cool. Right, I'm going to open it up to the floor. Have we got any questions for any of the panellists? Must have one. Yes, we've got one at the front.
I just wanted to ask Chris, do you have any plans to introduce some payment mechanisms behind your approach? Because it seems like you've got the beginning of, in essence, what's required in an anonymous, federated, token-based system. However, if your system also allowed me to make a payment anonymously under that same token, then for me that seems to be, regardless if it's your system or another, that I feel that's where this whole thing needs to end up, in an anonymous, token-based payment system where I can go to a site, anonymously confirm I'm of an age, make a payment, and then leave the site, and not have that site email me every day for the next 6 years trying to get me back there or anything else, or sell my data on to someone else.
Well, in short, at some point, I'm sure it will crop up on the roadmap. In terms of our MVP, what we're ultimately trying to, our minimum viable product, what we're trying to deliver at the moment is a core system that allows you to kind of show your identity online and indeed face-to-face to businesses and other individuals. But you're absolutely right. It does give us the kind of the technical ability to in the future move into that space. So it's a little bit of a watch this space, I think. Yeah.
And sorry, can you also determine, can I also, as a user, then say, well, I want to share my age, my location? Are you giving out the user control over which attributes they share with a particular site?
That's correct, yeah. So whatever verified attributes you have as a user, you're then able to pass on. So if you wanted to pass on your gender and your age and your location, you're able to do that and not pass on your name and your selfie. But if you just wanted to pass on your image and your name, you could equally do that. So if I met you as an individual in an online chat forum and I wanted to show you I was definitely Chris Field, I can send you a token that shows you that, but nothing else. So I don't need to show you my date of birth.
Got any more questions?
I feel I'm doing you a favour with a question and keeping everybody from their drinks. I'm sorry. George Kidd, I'm with the Online Dating Association, where it's for grown-ups, but it's not adult. I'm also involved as a regulator with the Direct Marketing Commission, and I just want to start briefly with that second point. Depending on how you go about age verification, you are going to be collecting a lot more personal information about people. And if this is about adult-related products, and it's specifically in relation to the adult sector, it seems to me that collectively you need to be prepared to give a very profound and deep assurance to people that you are not giving consent to data to be passed, recirculated and reused, because that would just wreck it, is my assumption. My next point is, it's clear that you can age verify. Chris has said it, it's happening. It can happen better, it can happen smarter. The suggestion was that if some people didn't want to play, well, the hell with them, they'll have to be barred. Pardon my French. What's the panel assumption on how that would happen? Because I have come from a co-regulatory background, and the assumption there had been that it was either you follow the money and the payment intermediary would pull the plug, or you follow the connectivity and the connective provider would pull the plug. Do people have an assumption about where the leverage would be for those who don't want to play ball?
So you're talking about, I mean, if we talk about adult content providers for now, so let's just roll forward. The market has got a standard for age verification. You've got an organisation that's based here or abroad, and they're not going to do what they're saying they're going to do. So I'll pass that on to Chris. What's your view on what should happen with them?
There were a couple of points in there I'd just like to come back to you on, George. The first point is on this collection of data. I mean, I favour moving away from this. Everything's predicated on identity presently, and we need to move away from that. So, it's about the assurance, the age checking, rather than, I think, we've talked about this issue. Verification is tying us too closely to identity. And I do favour some of these new approaches that are being pushed into the market, statistical analysis of your mobile use, of your online social footprint, and I think that's the way we need to be looking. Whether they're strong enough is another issue. So that brings us on to the point of levels of assurance. We haven't really talked. I mean, there are established LOAs in respect of identity. I think there needs to be something corresponding for these age checks. When we were talking with the banks earlier, there doesn't necessarily need to be an absolute for the adult industry. Currently, the requirement under ATVOD says that we have to ensure that minors would not normally hear or see that material. So, there is a kind of best endeavours, a good enough approach that we need to, and I think, the levels of assurance need to be proportionate. As regards how, well, The next point was about how we regulate this. I think the government is looking at or calling for self-regulation or co-regulation. I don't think that's going to come because those operators who we need to bring to the table are not even in the country. So how are we going to, how are we going to bring them into the room? Fortunately, we've got MindGeek who've stood up and said, we will work and develop systems. However, I'd be surprised if MindGeek turned those systems on before anything is mandated by government. So yeah, how we go about blocking? I mean, the solutions have been raised today. ISP blocking, but will the ISPs be prepared to do that? Is that tantamount to censorship? That's one question. Follow the money, no good if you're a tube site operator. Blocking the advertising, possibly. There's a lot to wrestle with, and I think we're only just, and hopefully we'll get some interesting responses to the government consultation.
Catherine, do you want to have a
Quickly add something to that. I know some of the offshore people who had businesses in the UK, and when the 2010 legislation came in, they went offshore. They're looking at this very closely, and I'm pretty convinced they would reshore their businesses.
Sorry, I just wanted to add that I think it's a really interesting question because obviously we're not in the adult entertainment field, but the PAS is trying to cross several different sectors. So it's trying to address age verification requirements or age check requirements for adult entertainment, electronic cigarettes, potentially gambling, although they've got their own issues with the money laundering thing, it's slightly different. Alcohol, tobacco, possibly glue, knives, scissors. It could go into everything that's age restricted, theoretically. And I think that ideally that's the model that we would seek to be following, is that we can find a solution that would work for all of them. And I'm a little bit concerned that obviously the requirements in law for the adult entertainment sector with this notion of good enough may be a bit more stringent for my sector, for example, whereby we have to really demonstrate. So that is, again, going to be a challenge for the DPA in developing this PAS to make sure that we get something that ends up being fit for purpose for your sector, for my sector, and for everybody else who needs it. But then, of course, all of it's largely irrelevant if there's no enforcement and if there's no voluntary uptake of the PAS. But no enforcement of the law as it stands, that is a big problem, and it remains a big gap.
I think from my point of view, there's some parallels here. We struggle constantly with application processes and friction in those processes. So throughout today, you've all heard how friction can make people bail out of the application process. This is all about the levels we set, the LOA, the level of assurance you set within the standards. And I've heard a couple of things here today which were really interesting. So we're starting out in this venture. We can see people like Chris who've adopted age verification very early in the game. Does that mean to say that my son can't use my credentials to pass through into a site? So this level of anti-impersonation comes into the LOAs. I'm not saying we launch into this high frictionful experience. I think someone said not to mention frictionful in this session. Frictionful experience at the start of this game, because people do bail out of the process, and we need to facilitate people's ability to board customers and make money through this. And if we turn that to a high level straight away, I think that we're going to lose consumers left, right and centre. So it's a very sensitive issue.
Can I say something very quickly? Sorry, from the point of view, because I'm ending up chairing a whole lot of this stuff. About two or three things. First thing is, because we're not looking at ISP blocking, the methods of doing any blocking or whatever, and we're also not looking at what should be behind the age firewall, as you might say it. That's for discussion elsewhere. We're just trying to do the age bit. But two things. One is I don't think ISP blocking methods work at all, because you've got websites, for instance, like Amazon, which will be selling age-sensitive material like DVDs, which can't be sold to under 16s, under 15s, under 18s, or whatever. It'll be different for the different things. So therefore, trying to block an entire website like that is not going to be practical. And ISPs can't block at the web page level. So it's not going to work in reality. And the other thing is I don't think that people are going to just register to go onto You can't blacklist every single website and then say 99% of them got to get whitelisted. I mean, there are problems with doing that. What I did want to say is 2 little points. One is because levels of assurance have been used with the identity world, we're probably going to start talking about degrees of confidence. Is the terminology we're thinking of at the moment, to try and have something that it doesn't get linked straight into identity. Because this is all about enrollment. It's all about how you decide that someone is of a certain age or of a certain identity or whatever. And so if the identity people are using that one term, we don't want to get confused because those are defined elsewhere in other PASs or other standards. And I did have another point, but I can't remember what it was.
Is it 1 o'clock?
It was something about the bit about it doesn't really matter. I'll remember in about a minute.
It might be 1 o'clock. Okay, we've got a few moments left. Has anybody got any more questions? And if not, I'm going to hand back to Rachel to finish the session. Any more questions from anyone? Any more comments from the panel? No? Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Okay, so thank you, everybody. And seeing as it is 1 o'clock, I'm going to quickly kind of do a summary. I'm going to say thank you to all the wonderful speakers. And I think you'll agree that each panel was comprised of very knowledgeable and insightful people. And we had a robust discussion. And also you in the audience in this room, some very considered discussion points were raised. And we were live streaming the event. So I'd also like to say thank you to those people who engaged online and for the comments from the Twitter sphere, which is great. So if you can think back, is it just me? And this morning seems like ages ago. So Baroness Shields came here and gave us a clear steer in terms of what the UK government wants. Pat Manson gave us insights into what the EU Commission was. And I have to commend Pete Johnson, who just summed up the fact that we've reached a status quo in terms of child safety online by saying, oh, parental controls and education, that'll do. And maybe it's time for innovation. And actually, Pat Manson talked about better internet for kids. So there was a multi-annual program called Safer Internet, and they've moved from that to better internet for kids. And what the next strategic objective that ties in with the digital payments, the PSD2, the Single European Payments Area, is this notion of connecting Europe and enabling young people to use their mobile and EIDs to transact online. So that is a significant, I don't know if the significance was I'd just like to bring that out. And the other significant point I'd like to make, John Carr mentioned that Facebook weren't here, but the companies that were here are represented by Lego and similar companies like Disney and YouTube for Kids. There is a cohort of companies that are catering for the under 12 generally age group that are really keen on developing solutions, and it's good to get the kind of the church of the willing together. And at the risk of sounding like a sports commentator, it might have felt like it was a day with two halves. We're talking about kids in the morning and adults in the afternoon. But the purpose of the POC panel was to demonstrate to the technical architecture, the pieces of the technical architecture that might underpin a federated approach, which is something that's wanted by both the child-focused and the adult-focused sectors. So we will be putting up the slides that you saw today. They'll be put up on Trust Elevate, so you can pop along there to see those. And we've also filmed the event as well, so there'll be some film footage up there. Just in this session, I mean, it's all fresh in your minds that Chris was saying they've been working on this area for 5 years, and I think that deserves recognition. Catherine is saying, yes, you're bringing in legislation, but give us some guidance about what to do. The BSI PAS, we're at the start of this. We just had the project initiation meeting on Thursday, so it's a 9 to 12 month process. So it's really key that we bring in the privacy experts and understand the business requirements and create a matrix of what the requirements are. We've consciously decoupled attribute, the standards in relation to attributes from identity proofing. The standards for identity proofing exist, and we will refer to those if a business requirement needs those. But we will be, as Merlin pointed out, developing degrees of confidence in terms of if one industry sector just needs a low-level a low degree of confidence that you've done checks, then that will be addressed in the standard. If it requires higher degrees of confidence, that will also be stipulated. So there is a lot of work to do that and get some agreement around that. One of the themes was about proportionality, and I want to assure everybody that that's the driving force for this. Privacy, commercial opportunities, and commercial viability are key things, and also scalability. So I think today we've put kind of a stake in the ground and a recognition that there is willingness amongst a number of sectors, and we will work with those sectors over the next year. So I think that's kind of a summary. I may have missed some major points, but I think we've now come to the point where we recognise that the BSI process is going to go ahead. We invite involvement in that. There is a steering committee that's been set up, and I'm imagining we'll be holding, so if you'd like to get involved in that process, the idea is to come to the Digital Policy Alliance Age Verification Group. So yeah, that's a good summary. I want to thank our sponsors again, without whom this couldn't have happened. So Evoco ID, Yachty is up here, VeryMe, thank you. Mind Candy, who were in the US, Equifax, thank you, and Timson's. And I'd also like to say a huge thank you to Paddy Cosgrove from the Web Summit, and we'll do the raffle in a moment. And a massive thank you to my colleague, Mark Dempsey, because it was the two of us that organised this. So shall we do the raffle?